Thank you, Max. Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, June 9th, 2021. This is a virtual meeting of the City of Rehoboth Beach, Wilmington, Baltimore Avenue Streetscape Task Force. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9:01 a.m. Thank you all for being here. With that, we're going to go ahead and start off with roll call. I'm going to name the individual members and a little description of their affiliation with the city, so that we have an understanding. Every member here is affiliated with the project zone in one way or another. And I'd like to identify that. If you would, please raise your hand as well as say aye. And hold your hand up enough so that people watching can recognize you. Thank you very much. With that, we'll start with roll call. Jenny Burton, owner and landlord of the shops at 33 Baltimore and the shops at Rehoboth Muse. Welcome,
Present.
Jenny.
Thank you.
Welcome. Frank Cole, owners Atlantic Cycles and Sea Change Cycles within the project area, also owner of Bob's Bikes on the transition area outside the project zone. Frank, you here?
Here.
Very good. Thank you, Frank. Welcome aboard. Frank Cooper, resident.
Here, Mayor.
Thank you, Frank. Daniel Fosnot, manager of the Oceanus Motel. Good to see you, Daniel. Randy Haney, an owner of Blue Moon Restaurant.
Sorry, I'm
You're
here.
muted.
I'm here.
You're there,
Can you hear?
You're there
Can you hear
somewhere. I know you are. We'll come back to you, Randy.
Okay, I'm having trouble with my audio, so.
Okay. Well, we see you are here, indeed. You'll be recognized. Patty Hoffman, owner of Stitch Statch on North First Street. Welcome, Patty.
Hi there.
David Mariner, Executive Director, Camp Rehoboth. Are you on board? Thank you, Daniel. David. Andy Medic, owner of Sea Change Vacation Rentals. Are you here? Don't see him on yet. Alex Moore, partner Avenue Inn, Beachview Hotel, and property ownership miscellaneous on Wilmington Avenue.
Here.
Welcome, Alex. Elise Moore, owner of the Admiral Hotel. Welcome, Elise.
Good morning.
Bob Pomerantz, owner of Brighton
Mayor.
Suites and owner of Hunt and Lane on Wilmington Avenue. I don't hear him here yet. Joe Baker, owner of Henlopen City Oyster House and Blue Hen Restaurant.
Good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Also members, Commissioner Ed Shranowski.
Morning.
Welcome, Ed. Commissioner Pat Caluzzi.
Here, good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. And Mayor Stan Mills is the chair. We have a quorum, so we're able to formally conduct business today. I'd also like to recognize the other people with me today. I've always said it takes many to put on a meeting, and so I'd like to recognize City Manager Sharon Lynn, Chief Keith Banks of the Police Department.
Morning.
Madison Matera, City Intern, Ann Womack, City Secretary, Margaret Carson, Executive Assistant, Kevin Williams, Director of Public Works, Evan Miller, Project Coordinator, and Max Hamby of the IT Department. Welcome to you all, and thank you for helping to support the meeting today.
Excuse me, Mayor. Howard Menaker, I didn't hear my name called, but I may have come on just a bit late, but I'm present. Thank you very much.
No, I think I skipped you. I appreciate you speaking up. Sorry, Howard.
No problem,
My
sir.
apologies. So Howard Menaker is here as well. Thank you. With that, I'd like to welcome all those watching today, and I'd also like to thank those participants who have registered in advance to be able to speak today. Those members registered to speak today are Alex Papajohn, Mike Strange, Rick Perry, and Dr. Michael Trejos. Thank you all for registering. We'll call on you at the appropriate times during the meeting to seek your input and feedback. Thank you. With that, I want to make note and reminder that all the available support documents that we have in hand as members are embedded into the agenda and available on the legislative portal, accessible via the city website. With that, we'll go to approval of minutes. Unfortunately, no sets of minutes are ready today, so we'll keep working on those. With that, we'll go to correspondence, and you have one set of correspondence from citizen Mike Strange that was dated June 3rd and sent by me as well as directly by Mr. Strange. So you have that in hand. With that, we'll go to old business, status of seeking engineering consultant knowledgeable in undergrounding of utilities. I think that's still in the works, but if we could just get a little blurb on what's going on in that realm.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. Yes, it is, has been signed and turned over to the consulting company. They're looking at a possibility of 4 months for completion, but you know, that could go longer if you know, they're not ready with other entities that they need to discuss it with. So, but it's in the works, and we're ready to go with that.
Very good, thank you. Very good. Because it's been a while since we've reviewed our mission and some of the statements, and we don't know whether there's any new watchers on there, I'd like to take a few minutes just to review a few things with you. I want to remind everybody that the purpose of this project is to develop a streetscape improvement concept to improve access by pedestrians and bicycles, safety and ambience for commercial viability. The project limits, of course, are noted as the first 2 blocks of Wilmington and Baltimore, and connector streets, 1st Street and 2nd Street. These streets basically encompass the downtown commercial core of Rehoboth Beach, and the improvements we're looking at are intended to elevate the perception of this commercial core relative to the boardwalk and Rehoboth Avenue, and incorporating the following objectives. Recommend opportunities to widen walkways to better accommodate pedestrian traffic and outdoor activities, including dining where appropriate. And everything would be, of course, handicap or ADA accessible. Recommend intersection improvements to enhance pedestrian safety and visibility. And I made a note added in there. Also, of course, that would include looking at crosswalks that we've mentioned in the past. Evaluate the connectivity to Rehoboth Avenue. And I added in there also look at connectivity to the boardwalk that we've talked about in the past. Recommend enhancements to and or maximize parking. Of course, the task force will be influencing parking by our very talks today. Recommend location suggestions to accommodate landscaping, tree pits, bio-retention gardens, hardscape improvements, lighting, benches, parking meters, trash cans, and space for outside dining. Recommend green infrastructure concepts and ideas into the plan. And by the way, that last item, we would add in there bike racks. Frank Cooper, you mentioned that several times. And of course, that is a part of what we would be looking at. Recommending where detailed further evaluation may be warranted. You know, we are working as a task force, I think very well, to establish the foundation for all these streetscape concepts. So what's the end objective? Rossi will develop one streetscape concept based on our recommendations. They will develop the streetscape concept recommendations to be consistent with the comprehensive development plan, the 2nd Street streetscape plans that were recently completed, the Rehoboth Avenue streetscape plans, and they will meet applicable DELDOT regulations and, of course, follow ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act standards. So those are all things that are in the works, that are not necessarily been talked about as a whole, but will be addressed by Rossi. So where have we been? Again, I just want to take this opportunity to review things. Where have we been? Well, we talked about, as a task force, do we need or not need a traffic study? And we decided no. We decided to utilize existing traffic patterns, no one-way traffic patterns. We decided to examine limited vehicle access areas, but only at the ends of Baltimore and Wilmington Avenue street end. And I added in there that this includes examination of the best approach to invite patrons off the boardwalk and onto Wilmington and Baltimore avenues. Again, that's not yet addressed by Rossi. That's one of the future steps. The other thing the task force came up with as a priority is to examine undergrounding. And again, we're awaiting a specialty engineering consultant to partner with Rossi in examining undergrounding. So we're not there yet. It really is on our radar, but it's not a significant part of the discussion yet. So where are we today? Rossi has asked us, the task force, to try to identify the desired schematics for each street or portion of a street, to include streetscape elements such as travel lanes, parking, sidewalk areas, etc. And I do want, I'm starting to lose my voice, my apologies. Indicator that I talk too much, probably. I do want to introduce a couple of disclaimers, and that is, Rossi certainly recognizes that we're not experts, but I do believe that each of us has a little expertise for the areas of town that we populate and visit and have businesses on. And we need to recognize that when we make decisions, as we will today, Rossi will take those recommendations and look at them holistically, analyze them, come back and see how they mesh with other elements, for instance, the limited vehicle areas and undergrounding. So those are still elements yet to come, but again, they will be analyzed formally. So I also wanted to divert just for a minute. I was not involved heavily with the Rehoboth Avenue streetscape design. I was in part of some of an unofficial informal group called an aesthetic committee that was formed back during those days, looking at different things. But that process, by my recollection, is not unlike what we're doing today. I mean, think about it, Rehoboth Avenue streetscape, they were dealing with an area of right-of-way, almost from building facade to building facade, north to south. They likely started in the median and said, what width of the median do we want? We're going to center it. And then they decided whether they're going to have parking in the median or not. As you know, some of the median has parking and some up toward the entrance to town does not have any parking. And then moving to the inside, you've got travel lanes and minimum travel width of those lanes. Then you've got parking on the outside perimeter that is perpendicular or diagonal for certain areas. And as you approach the beginning of town, up near the canal, you know that you do parallel parking. And then based on what width you decide there determines what the width of the outer sidewalks are. Obviously, there's nothing that's totally consistent. Measure or take a look at the sidewalks at Purple Parrot. Maybe they're 10, 12 foot wide there. Compare that to Conch Island. It's probably got 25 to 30 feet. But anyhow, what I'm trying to say is, I think we have a good process. We're following Rossi's lead, and frankly, it mirrors the streetscape improvements for Rehoboth Avenue. So, what do we want to do first? First, I would like to formalize and vote on 4 streetscape concepts, and that would be, let me see if I can bring something up here. Conch Island, probably got 25 to 30. But anyhow, hold on. The last 2 meetings I kind of held us back from voting on things. I wanted to give everybody adequate time to talk about things. So now's the time I would like to formalize and vote on our philosophies on 4 things. First I'd like to address would be the vote on whether or not to consider use of bicycle facilities. And what does that mean? That means, are we voting to have dedicated bike lanes or use of shared roadways with appropriate signing and sharrows? Now, I know we've talked before, and the consensus was to steer clear of bike lanes. All I want is a very quick vote, but I want and need the rationale to report to our commissioners on why we're choosing one over the other. Now, you got to remember, please, when I am sharing the screen, I cannot see. Am I shared?
No.
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Jenny, go ahead.
Was there an agenda sent?
Yes, you should have received the agenda, yes. Basically, at this point, the agenda is just discuss draft streetscape schematics developed by Rossi Group, which retain general roadway circulation and layout to improve pedestrian sidewalk areas, safety circulation, targeting selection of desired schematics for further development by the Rossi Group. So you should have received an agenda about a week ago. And the main purpose and target of this meeting, Jenny, is to finalize or try as best we can to finalize some of the schematics per street area there. Any other questions? Again, I can't see anybody when I'm shared screen. You need to just speak up, say your name if you would, and I'll recognize you.
Mayor, it's Edward.
Commissioner Chernowski, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question from for the city manager. What firm have we engaged to do the underground study?
The company name is JMT.
Okay, thank you.
They're the ones that engineered Rehoboth Avenue.
Correct.
And they also engineered Garfield Highway and Bethany Beach. So they've got experience with streetscapes as well as experience with undergrounding.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know.
So what I would like to do, is formalize 4 concepts. If we start off with the first, is I would seek a motion to go with shared roadways with appropriate signings such as sharrows, and thereby abandoning the use of dedicated bike lanes. Would somebody make a motion similar to that?
Mayor, this is Pat Caluzzi.
Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things that I think I believe when we last spoke, all of us, we talked about the fact that maybe some of the blocks needed to be looked at individually. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that there should be a bike lane in the first block that, should, in the first block of Wilmington or Baltimore, but do we think that we want to ask Rossi to develop some other options, given that the street width, and this could go for, not just bike lanes, but the street width is so different in the beach block than it is in the second block?
Based on the last 2 meetings, I didn't get the impression that anybody was interested in that, especially citing that the traffic was minimal, that the widths of the travel lane were minimal, at least in the second block, and not sufficient for dedicated bicycle lanes, and that in the first block, the bike lanes ended up being dead ends. Does anybody want to rehash any of this?
Mayor, this
If
is
not,
Howard
then
Menaker.
Yes, Howard.
Yeah, I think Pat raises a good point about sort of viewing block by block, because they do differ so greatly. But I'd like to go ahead and make a motion in this case that this task force recommend that no bike lanes be implemented within the streetscape area, but rather that bikes will share the travel lanes with sharrows with vehicular traffic.
I'll second that motion.
So we have a motion by Howard Menaker and a second by Frank Cooper to essentially abandon the use of dedicated bike lanes within the concept area and instead use shared roadways, with appropriate signing such as sharrows. Is there additional discussion? We can take rationale from our previous meeting, but if anybody wants to re-articulate it, they feel free.
Mr. Mayor,
Frank, yes, sir. Frank
Yeah.
Cooper, Frank Cole.
I just want to kind of express my own opinion that I'm a big supporter of bike lanes, and I think the public should know that the city is bike friendly and trying to do things to make cycling in Rehoboth Beach a little bit more attractive or easier to do. But it's just that, as the committee has stated in past meetings, it just doesn't seem to be a good application in these particular spots. It's not like a major throughway where you're going from one end of town to the other. You know, this is basically 2 blocks. And in some cases, the blocks are very narrow. So I don't know if any other committee members would like to chime in, but I think it's important that we make some sort of statement to the effect that we're not against bike lanes per se. We just don't think that they're a good fit for this particular project.
Frank Cooper?
Yes, I completely agree with Frank Cole. I mean, I am a huge advocate of facilitating bicycle travel in and out of downtown Rehoboth. I use it myself. But in this situation, I think that you are actually serving the cyclist and everyone better by using a sharrow system than you are by individual bike lanes. And I think we've established that. But I do agree with Pat Caluzzi and others that say that all of these things should be malleable. I mean, as we get further on in other discussions and later on in this process, we can revisit this if necessary, but this is fine to say for now that we've kind of reached this consensus and that's where we are. Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments? If not, be able to see everybody here. If not, we have a motion on the floor in a second to go with shared bike routes and travel lanes versus dedicated bicycle lanes. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Hold your hand up so I can do a count.
Aye.
So I said, everybody, Randy, I still can't get you. Randy,
Sorry.
are you a yes or a no? Okay, so
I'm yes.
this is approved unanimously, from what I can see. Thank you very much.
Mayor,
With that, I want to,
were you asking us to also give our reason why we were voting the way we were voting, or that you weren't going to do that?
I think, you know, there was fine in discussion, but we can also take that from the last meeting. And Frank Cole gave some good reasons also. If you want to give an individual reason, you certainly have the opportunity.
For the record, I'd like to say that I do support what both Frank Cole and Frank Cooper said. But had we been able to have a traffic study, that I think the results of this might have been different, because one-way streets could have factored in allowing for a bike lane. So I just want to put that on the record, but I think this is probably the best decision given what we're dealing with as we move forward with the fact that we can't really decide on anything that would have been recommended to us by an expert in doing a travel study. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. With that, I want to look at, get any more feedback on 3 other philosophies that we talked about before we get on to the main task at hand today. The second action to look at is conferring on what the minimum traffic lane was. If you recall, the minimum traffic lane that we talked about last week, the minimum from Rossi is 9 foot. Last meeting, we said, as a group, I believe we said 10 foot should be the minimum. However, when feasible, we should go to a minimum of 11 foot or 12 foot. Does anybody have any comments on that? Because otherwise, the rest of our presentation today is generally going to try to follow that formula. Frank Cooper?
Yeah, generally, I am for keeping the traffic lanes as narrow as possible and dedicating any extra space we have to pedestrian traffic. So I think the 9-foot should be the rule unless we have a whole lot of space like we do up near the boardwalk. That's all.
Well, I would disagree. 9 foot, if you looked at those drawings and if you went around town over the weekend and looked at different areas and travel lanes, 9 foot is very, very tight. 10 foot, for me, is the minimum. And yet you'll see in today's discussions what we put on the screen and show you for discussion, I believe 10 and actually I believe 11 foot will work fine and still get us an adequate sidewalk width. We are going to be talking about sidewalk width next, Frank.
Yes, I can understand that we have 9 foot now in some areas, and while it's narrow, it's also an approved method for traffic calming. That the narrower lanes are, the slower people drive by nature. So I just like to put that in there. Thank you very much.
All right, that's your note. Anybody else want to comment?
Mr. Mayor,
Otherwise, our presentation today is largely based on a 10-foot minimum, but availability of 11 foot when feasible. Frank Cole?
I would agree with you, Mr. Mayor, and I think if you're not going to have a bike lane, then you need wider streets to facilitate bike travel. That's in my experience what makes a street safer, is to have a nice wide street where motorists feel that they can comfortably pass cyclists on, who are on the right-hand side of the road. So for that reason, I would agree with you and tend to recommend wider streets as opposed to the 9-foot streets.
Anybody else other than Frank?
Yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about, is the fact I think that the whole Shero idea is that this is a merging of bicycle and automobile traffic. You don't want people trying to speed up and go past bicycles in this area. And when you have narrower lanes, it's impossible to do that. So, I mean, you either have like enough room that they can comfortably pass. I think the state's minimum on this, the law says that when you pass a bicycle, you need 3 feet of distance between you and the bicycle. That's virtually impossible with the spaces we're talking about. So I think we're better off working with a traffic calming sort of method and the true Shero. And what a Shero means is that bicycles are part of the traffic. They move with it and within it. So that's the concept I prefer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll move on. Again, you'll see today how this works out. And we will be recommending a minimum of 10 or 11 when feasible. As far as the next item, minimums for parking, our presentation today, that is with Evan Miller and Kevin Williams and myself making presentation, we're going to be utilizing the minimum dimensions for parking as presented on this chart. And basically, head-in parking needs 18 feet, diagonal parking needs 19 feet, and parallel parking needs 8 feet. With that, the fourth item is minimum pedestrian path width. You'll notice that they suggest a minimum of 4 foot. Well, that's unrealistic, because that's more for ADA compatibility or the minimums. Their recommended minimum is 5 feet. On their other sheet, they indicate an optimum width of 8 feet. And what we're trying to do is present something above 5 feet as close to 8 feet as possible. So we've got 4 philosophies here that we're working with today. Shared bike path, not designated lanes, minimum through width for traffic of 10 or 11 feet, 12 foot if feasible. Minimums for parking as noted on this sheet, and the minimum sidewalk areas or pedestrian circulation path of as wide as we can get, optimally 8 foot or above. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Kevin. What we're gonna do is take each street. In fact, let me do this, Kevin, real quick as a reminder that what I'd like to remind everybody is that Rossi gave us concepts. Concept 1A focuses on pedestrian areas. Concept 1B focuses on designated bicycle lanes, or which we have crossed off, so concept 1B is no longer being considered, and concept 2 is a third option that could have a hybrid. You know, you could remove a turn lane or something here, but again, we're looking at these concepts with these elements: pedestrian circulation area, turn lanes, possible parking area, through lanes, and we're trying to decide what is the optimum situation for each street. Kevin, let's start with Second Street and take a look at some potentials. What we tried to do. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mayor, but before we move into the block by block consideration, I think we went past the pedestrian and the sidewalk issue pretty quickly. If you don't mind, I would like for the task force to go on record that in all applications, the pedestrian pathways, the sidewalks be as wide as feasible in each block of this area that we're considering, and use that as a guiding principle. And then we can go to look at each individual one. But I think that in the same way we wanted an overall principle on bike lanes being, you know, not included but sharrows, I'd like to do the same with pedestrian.
Do you want a formal vote, or is everybody comfortable with just adopting that philosophy?
I'm happy to make that as a formal motion, that the task force go on record as recommending the widest possible pedestrian pathways in all instances within the streetscape.
Can you say that one more time? Sorry, I missed. Can you say that one more time?
Sure. The motion was that the task force go on record as recommending the widest possible pedestrian pathways and sidewalks in each instance throughout the streetscape.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I guess I'm hesitant to go there, because if our philosophy is to make sidewalks as wide as possible, which I don't disagree with, but is liable to interfere with the number of traffic lanes, or it's liable to force us to get rid of a turn lane or something like that. I don't want it to go so far that the width of the sidewalk will dictate a narrower traffic lane than we intend or something. So I don't mind voting on it, but I think we need to consider being flexible as we look forward through the rest of today's presentations. So you have a motion on there. Frank, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with Howard that what we're setting here is our preference, our general desire that sidewalks take precedence over traffic lanes, but not to the point where it's impracticality. I mean, we're discussing this, but I think it's what he's saying is that as a general principle, we're looking to increase the pedestrian area, and sometimes at the expense of travel lanes, but not going below reasonable minimums, as you stated in your desires. So I would second that motion, Howard's motion.
All right, thank you. So we have a motion by Howard Menaker and a second by Frank Cooper to seek the widest pedestrian circulation path as possible and within reason. Is there any additional discussion? We'll have all those in favor, hold up your hand and just hold it there so I can do a count. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Patty, are you up or down?
I don't know.
Okay, well, we've got 10, and so actually that would, the motion would be carried. Does anybody that says no want to give an explanation? Offer anything for the record? All right, we'll move on. Again, what we're doing is we're gonna take a look at each block one at a time.
Jenny had something. Jenny just started to say something.
Yeah, Jenny, go ahead.
I basically abstain from that because I just feel like in a lot of ways we're in with this. I know it's overall, but I just, again, feel like each block and each section of each street should be looked at differently. Where just overall, I agree with pedestrians. We should have as much as we can to attract people to come to these streets and have walking and make it inviting and easy for people to walk. But also there's so much that goes into, you know, the trucks that are there 3 days a week delivering supplies and the whole 9 yards. It's just, it's kind of complicated in a lot of ways when it comes to making a decision overall for the entire streetscape. I do agree there should be as much pedestrian walking area as possible, but there are areas that are going to be where we're not going to be able to do that, meaning the west end of each street. And so that's why I abstain, because I don't think it should be a blanket decision.
Well, that's why I asked for flexibility. Jenny, we almost couldn't hear you that time, so next time you talk, maybe you can get closer to the microphone. But we could hear you. Let's do this. Indulge me, Pat. I'll come to you, but then if you would indulge me, let's look at one street so you can see how I'm intending for us to analyze all this. And I think it'll hopefully be clear to everybody on our potential approach here. Commissioner Calusi?
No, I'm happy to do that, because I think what Howard Menaker was saying is it's a guiding principle. Where you can do it, where you can't, because of other reasons, as Jenny is mentioning, then you don't. So I think that was the intent, and I see Howard shaking his head. So nobody's making a hard and fast rule here, I don't think, because again, I do believe looking at these blocks individually is an important, and I'm hoping Rossi will do that. I would think it would make sense for them to do so. But that's my comment on that. Thank you.
Well, and I'd like to reiterate something I said earlier. That for me, there's nothing set in stone what we do, even if we vote on something. That if Rossi takes our recommendations and starts to analyze them and act on them, and yet finds something is inappropriate or doesn't work, they're going to come back with recommendations for us, and I feel that that's very good. Let's take a look at 2nd Street. Again, we're looking at all the elements of.
Did you want to reference the cut sheets that they want to be?
Yeah, you all. Part of our reference sheets, support documents that were sent out, are documents that have the existing dimensions for the different streets. If you have that in front of you, you might pull out 2nd Street. That's this kind of document. Do you want to go ahead and do, let's go to 2nd Street. What we tried to do is we had some kind of dress rehearsals where we tried to recall what direction you all wanted to go to from the last meeting. And so we tried to analyze each street based on what we thought were your recommendations coming out of that last meeting. And that's where we're going to start today. Do you want to start Do you recall what we came up with here? If you recall, this is the section, do you want to lead? Go ahead.
I'm at Delaware if you want to walk it down.
We're on Second Street. We're near the intersection of Delaware, looking north. So up near the cursor up here would be Baltimore or Wilmington on the right, and Rehoboth Avenue ahead. You recall dimensions of all this? We were looking at the recommendation that came out of the last meeting was to take a look at this and see if possibly we could do parking lanes on the parking areas on the right side there. Notice right now the entirety of that right side is yellow curb. So there's a possibility here of 2 11-foot travel lanes plus an 8-foot parking lane. And Rossi would have to analyze it to see if parking was available. They would also want to analyze it to see if we wanted to have a partial turn lane there. I think our little group agreed with the turn lane in the next section, but not necessarily here. Any comments on, anybody analyzed their take on Second Street from Delaware, Christian to Wilmington? What we got out of the last meeting was, again, 2 through lanes. We're talking about a minimum of 11, and that allows for 8-foot parking on the side if we can fit parking in, with a truncated turn lane or no turn lane to get onto Wilmington. And that actually widens up the sidewalks on each side also.
Yeah, Mayor, this is Howard Menaker.
Frank Cooper?
Yes, Mayor, I like the idea of adding parking where we can. I mean, we had talked about removing parking in other areas to facilitate traffic turning on Baltimore Avenue and whatnot. So any place we can pick up parking to mitigate that and give us more flexibility in other areas, I think we should look at very strongly. And the part between Christian Street and I guess Delaware Avenue there, I don't see why we wouldn't have parking along there. I mean, it might be sort of tight, but the rest of the town is sort of tight. So I'm in favor of adding parking there if Rossi decides that it's feasible.
Mayor?
Well, again, in this section, if you look at your diagrams of existing conditions, it says 34-foot curb to curb. So if we have 2 11-foot through lanes and an 8-foot parking area there instead of a turn lane, then that allows us to widen the sidewalks quite a bit. And I think that achieves our goal.
Mayor?
Yes, Frank, Howard, go ahead.
Howard Menaker here. I concur with the direction we're going with 2 travel lanes and parking. But when you talk about widening the sidewalks, are you proposing that we widen the sidewalks on both sides or just on the east side? Or is that just something to be determined later on?
Most likely, if we can, we do it equally on both sides. Right now, if you see some of the diagrams immediately north of Delaware, there's an existing condition immediately north of Delaware that's only got a sidewalk on one side of less than 5 feet and on the other side less than 6 feet. So by going with 11 and 11 and 8 is 22, 30, we can gain 4 feet. So we could go to 5, 6, 7 foot on one side and 8 foot on another in terms, or equidistant. So in other words, we are able to almost achieve that 8-foot optimum pedestrian circulation width on each side.
Thank you. I think knowing that makes it easy for me to support that plan.
So not hearing any other comments, what we would direct Rossi to do is for this one section of the road, to look at 2 minimum 11-foot through lanes, plus a parking area as much as we can get, and spread the rest of the width out by enlarging the sidewalk areas on each side. You capture that?
So am I
Is everybody comfortable with that?
I have a
Because
quick
then
question.
Yes, Patty.
So right now there's 3 total lanes. So are we getting rid of 1 lane and widening the sidewalks? Is that kind of what the gist of it?
Well, we have 3 lanes now,
Yep.
right there. What's pictured there right now. We've got 3 lanes that
Yeah.
are travel lanes. And on the left side of what's shown there now would become a parking area. So there would be 1 travel lane going north and 1 travel lane going south.
Okay. And I travel that every single morning, so I'm very familiar with that, section, and it's not that busy. That's okay with me. Okay. Yep. Now I understand.
Now again, that would be what we pass on. They're liable to come back and say there's no opportunity to do that because of the curb cuts. The chief's liable to come back and say after analyzing it, he doesn't like it. He wants a turn lane. But we've got to start somewhere, and I think this is a good foundation. So that is only, again, the block of 2nd Street, South 2nd Street between Delaware Christian and Wilmington. With that, now we're looking at the section of 2nd Street from Wilmington to Rehoboth Avenue. And if you recall at the last meeting, the chief did indicate that he prefers turn lanes. And I think we were specifically talking about 1st Street, but I think it's also applicable to 2nd Street. So what we were looking at here, we're looking at the width. We've got a 32-foot curb to curb. If we have 3 lanes, 11 foot, 11 foot, 11 foot, that takes up the complete curb to curb distance, and it still yields probably almost 10-foot sidewalks on each side. So that would be exactly as you're looking at now, the same configuration. 1 northbound through lane, 1 southbound through lane, and a right turn lane for the entirety of that block. But again, doing that with our 11-foot minimums for the through lanes, we're able to achieve wider pedestrian paths by just a little bit. Right there on the right is currently 8 feet. On the left is 11 foot 6. So we might be able to equalize those a little bit. Any comments?
Yeah, Mayor, similarly to 1st Street, if you're going southbound on North 1st, the turn lane there, there's some parking, and then the turn lane is, half the block. I'm not sure that we need the full block to be a turn lane here, similarly to how it's set up on North 1st, maybe only half the block be a turn lane.
You're not going to get, it doesn't gain you any parking on that side because of the curb cuts.
Okay.
And the short duration of curb.
Okay, just a thought.
Yeah, you're talking about immediately right there. It looks like because of the curb cut, maybe you could squeeze 1 car in, but you've got to remember, the car has to start a sufficient distance away from the radius corner there. So it looks like it may not work. And if it does, it would only be for one car. Is it really worth it for one car? So we could certainly have Rossi look at that, but I expect that would be nixed.
Understood.
Frank Cooper.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mayor, but you were saying that the plan that you just iterated is widening the sidewalks in this area?
Yeah, again, if you take a look at your existing conditions, up near Rehoboth Avenue by the Thunderbird shop up there,
Right.
the sidewalk currently is a little over 11 feet wide. But if you look at the sidewalk down by the Oceanus, directly opposite Wilmington Avenue, the sidewalk's only 6 foot wide. So we would try to gain some consistency there the best we can.
Right. Well, that sounds like a very good idea. Right. Thank you.
So essentially, while we can look into parking on the right side with a partial turn lane, essentially it's likely going to be the same exact pattern that we have there, except trying to maximize the width of the sidewalk. Any other comments by the members? I'll take your silence then as that's what we'll pass on to Rossi. Go ahead, Frank Cooper.
Yeah, I think widening the sidewalks, that's a case in point where it's really a good idea that coming off of Rehoboth Avenue to get people to walk down that section, that block there, it's not very inviting right now. And so those improvements could really make a big difference for the businesses further down that block.
Any other member comments? Let's take a look at First Street, and we'll start at, I don't know, do you want to go back and look at it from north looking south, at Maryland looking south?
Turn around.
This is the intersection of North First Street at Maryland Avenue. We're looking south. Right now you're looking at 2 travel lanes that are 10 foot wide and two parking areas there that are only that are less than 8 foot, one 7 foot and one 6 foot. So it doesn't meet our minimums. And the recommendation there, again, that we thought we heard in the last meeting that we're examining is looking at keeping parking on the left side and getting rid of the parking on the right side and converting that parking and the 2 travel lanes into only 2 lanes, one south against the right curb, one north, and parking on the left side. What this does with our minimums that we've said, minimum 11 foot travel lanes or 10 foot, 11 foot travel lanes, minimum of 8 foot parallel parking, that allows us to expand the sidewalks on both sides of the street. Right now, those sidewalks are approximately 6 foot wide.
And Mayor, can you tell us how many parking spaces would that remove?
7. I'm right here looking at it. I just counted it.
Thanks, Patty.
I just walked out my door to count myself.
Yeah, there's 7 parking, you're correct. There's 7 parking spaces on the left side, and there's 7 parking spaces on the right side.
Can I make a comment? I understand about meeting the specs and everything. Being a business owner and seeing what's out there every single day, this block is, the parking spots are taken every single day, all day long. I think I know it's 7, but it's a busy street. And they're used every day, all day.
I don't disagree, and I think you could probably say that about almost every spot in the commercial area, that they're all value, everyone's value.
I don't disagree,
and I
but what
don't
I'm
disagree
saying
with
in
that, but
all year round, because I'm open all year round and I'm busy all year round, I see it all year long, not just the summer season.
Well, this group has decided to go with the minimums, and so if you have those minimums, the only dictate is that we get rid of those cars on one side without going to a one-way street in the middle, so that there's only one lane. I mean, we don't have a lot of choices here. Frank Cooper?
I'm with Patty on this. I don't, and you said as a group we decided. I did not concur with the widening of lanes at the loss of parking. I think this is a case in point where in this particular area, it's best left alone. I mean, this is less space for everything than we would like, but it's functional now. And it is what it is. I mean, I don't think we're going to be actually improving the street significantly. And if the business owner there, I mean, that's who extensively we're trying to help, and if she doesn't think that this is an improvement, in other words, then what's the point? That's why.
And I'm just going to bring up another point. There's 3 30-minute spots on the opposite side of the street we're talking about. So you're kind of limiting more parking because you have the 3 30-minute spots and then you take away 7. And it's busy. And Frank
Mayor.
Cole, I'd be actually interested because he's got Bob's Bikes across the street. I know a lot of people drop people off with their cars and stuff like that and go there. Be interested in his opinion too.
Well, I would agree with.
A couple things for everybody's analysis. One is that the comprehensive development plan recommends removal of the parking spaces on the west side, so this reflects that. Just FYI, the parking was left on the left side by Kevin, Evan, and myself for this exercise to accommodate transformers and whatever for possible undergrounding. Remember, if you remember, Rossi's recommendation or an analysis indicated that there was no opportunity to underground some of these on North First Street because there's no place to put transformers. So you've got 2 things. And then again, even if you stick with 10-foot minimum through lanes, then the parallel parking on each side needs to be expanded by a foot on each side, which then reduces our pedestrians' pathways from 6 foot to 5 foot, which is a lot less than what we anticipated. Anybody feedback from anybody else?
Mayor, this is Rick.
Frank Cole, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond. They're exactly right. That those parking spaces are very heavily used. There's people in and out of there all day. I would just add that those intersections, both at Maryland and Baltimore Avenue, seem to be getting increasingly worse. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's just we're seeing more people so far this year, but it's a dicey area to navigate by car, by bike, by foot. You name it. It's just narrow. But I would generally agree that taking away the parking spots might not be in the town's best interest.
Anybody else?
Mayor, this is Howard Menaker.
Yeah, Howard, go ahead.
Can you help us a little bit here? I know that Rossi came back and said they recommended that the minimum for a parking lane or parking spaces would be 8 feet. In this case, they are less than that currently, and I don't know that there's a problem there. So do you know what their rationale is? And I guess this really is two questions. One, what is the rationale for the 8-foot minimum for parking space? And two, do you recall the rationale for the CDP for removing that parking on the west side?
As far as the CDP, no, I don't know the rationale. I've always assumed it was because of the narrow lanes there. Chief, you or Kevin, do you all recall a minimum code for the width of parallel parking spaces?
I don't know. So I would guarantee that DelDOT, looking long-term, if we're going to try to get DelDOT funding through TAP program or whatever, they're not going to provide funding for a parking space that's 7.5 feet wide. So they're going to require us to meet their minimum if we want to use any other funding. So then that means to get 8 foot on both sides and even keep the minimum, and we're at 7 now, so you put a foot on each of those. It's either got to come out of the travel lane, a foot on each side, or a foot on each side of the pedestrian circulation path. So either make your sidewalk smaller or your travel lane smaller.
I think those are the two options. The sidewalks are smaller, less than optimum, or the through lanes go. Now, remember the through lanes, they said the minimum could be 9 feet. I guarantee you, for 22 years, I've walked those streets, and when you see UPS trucks and RVs and different delivery trucks go up and down, Cisco trucks, they almost have to stop at the end of the street and wait for it to clear up before they can go down there, because you can't get 2 Cisco trucks or UPS trucks side by side going down there. It's just not possible because of the rear view mirrors, for instance, and the width of the truck. So we've got minimum options there. The biggest option is to get rid of parking there. Patty, go ahead.
Another point is we haven't had a restaurant in the old Jake's building in 3 years, I think it is, since I've been here. There is a brand new restaurant that's coming that's going to attract more people, which will be more parking to benefit, this whole area. We need the parking here. So, like we haven't had Jake's, it's been less busy and we still use all the parking spots. And from I have big windows in the front of my shop. If you took the sidewalks down a foot, I don't think it would be a problem from pedestrian walking. It's a very busy walking area, but I don't think losing a foot on the sidewalks would be a problem.
Okay, well, we need an opinion then. If we're not getting rid of that parking, what are we sacrificing? The width of the sidewalk, so it's going to be less than optimum? It violates what we just voted on earlier.
Mayor.
I would speak to that. Is there anything that says we have to change things? I mean, we're looking at this block by block, and there's existing non-conforming here essentially. But in order to get DelDOT funding, is it making us change this? I mean, if we're not doing anything, essentially, I mean, if maybe this is just best left alone. Maybe we don't need to change anything here.
Can I make another comment? If we're looking at this, is Paluzzi. TAP funding is a transportation alternatives program. So, what I don't know that they would even consider doing additional parking, because I don't think that's the goal of the TAP program. Maybe Kevin or somebody else can correct me on that, but that's something to think about. And also, as far as parking is concerned, I mean, this is always an issue. Nobody wants to get rid of parking in front of their store. I mean, they don't. I mean, I remember some time ago when I put bicycle parking in front of Mark Showell's, and he was like, you can't do that because people use the parking in front of my store. And so that's always going to be the issue here. So I'm not sure how we make a decision because of these those particular issues by business owners. And, you know, we're hearing from two business owners, and I wonder what the rest of the business owners think about if you took away parking in front of their store, you know, how would they
Can
feel?
I totally don't disagree with you. The point I make is there's the two businesses on this street and the one is coming. So there's not a lot of businesses to have the discussion and ask. I mean, nobody wants to get rid of parking. I totally agree with that. But when you get rid of 7 spots on a whole street, that's tough. That are very busy.
I probably can't do a good job of reiterating what Mike Strange said. His philosophy was that you don't necessarily, if you're enhancing the streetscape, that in itself is going to attract more people onto each block, which increases patronage. And so therefore you don't need all that parking. And I'm starting to grasp that a little bit, and I don't disagree with it. But again, if we're doing this to enhance the streetscape, I think we need to go all out and take care of that. If we're not going to resolve this, maybe we need to in our less than an hour that we have left to go through all the other blocks and then see if we can finalize this at a meeting next week. I'm just not sure we're going to be able to get through, and it might behoove us to look at every street and take a look at it, make a few comments, and so that by the end of the meeting, we're able to have seen proposals for each block. Does anybody else have any comments on this particular block?
Yeah,
Mayor Cooper.
Go ahead, Randy.
All I was going to
Go
say
ahead.
isn't this outside of the streetscape area that we're discussing anyway? Because we're talking Maryland to Baltimore at this point, and I thought we were working from Baltimore to Wilmington and First Street and Second Street in those areas. So maybe this is an area that we leave alone at this point because it is functional. I think when we go to the next section of the street, when we look at Baltimore to First, we're probably going to consider losing those 3 spaces on the, I guess it would be the north side of Baltimore, no, the west side of First Street, because we're going to need a turn lane or something and then keep the parking only on the other side. So my suggestion might be at this point that we leave this section alone, and maybe it's just a matter of adjusting the parking spaces in the center line so that the parking spaces are equal on each side of the street, and the center, and leave the through lanes at 9 feet through there with a center line so that people know where the center of the road is.
The streetscape project limits, if you look at your diagram, go to the middle of the block here, and it would make sense that rather than just stopping it abruptly, that we're able to continue it to the Maryland Avenue line. And again, since it's in the project line, what you're seeing on screen, we would definitely have to upgrade the parking. And therefore, based on some of these diagrams, to increase the width of the parallel parking on both sides would reduce the width of the sidewalks on both sides, right, Kevin?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's correct.
Well, let's take a look. We're not going to resolve this today. I'd hope we would. Let's take a look at the next section, which is the area from Baltimore to Rehoboth Avenue.
Mayor, could I make one point?
Yeah.
So regarding Michael Strange's comments that you referenced, I completely agree with you on that. But I think that's more important, bringing people off of Rehoboth Avenue and off of the boardwalk, not necessarily from Maryland to Baltimore. But another point is, I think if you spin around there, we have to lose 1 or 2 parking spots anyway. Where that white vehicle and the postal service truck are in that image, you cannot turn left off of Baltimore Avenue and see the traffic, the oncoming traffic. So we're going to have to lose, in my opinion, for safety, 1 or 2 of those spots anyway. But it is still, it's hard to have an appetite to lose 7 spots. I understand. But I agree, we have to have at least an 8-foot minimum for parking spots, especially if we need to get funding. Those are just a couple points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else on North First between Baltimore and Wilmington, or Baltimore and Maryland?
Mayor,
If not, let's take. Oh, go ahead, Elise.
Hi. I would agree with Edward that I think the larger sidewalks are more important possibly between Rehoboth Avenue and Baltimore Avenue, because you're drawing people, since Rehoboth Avenue is where most of the traffic is. My biggest concern with not possibly taking out the parking and leaving the sidewalks the size that they are right now between Baltimore and what's the other?
Maryland.
Thank you, Howard. Is where, if we do the underground, if we get rid of the wires, where would they go? Where would those transformers go on that block? Because if the sidewalks are super narrow, where would you put them?
Potentially underground.
Well, as I was trying to explain earlier, that we were suggesting leaving the parking on the right side, as you see in the picture, because that gives you the opportunity to consume 1 or more parking spaces with bump outs that would facilitate areas to put transformers or benches or trash cans or lights or whatever.
Okay.
And that would, and by doing so, that preserves a clear path on the sidewalks.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
So let's take a look at the first block of North First Street between Baltimore, where we're in the intersection now, looking toward Rehoboth Avenue. There are different thoughts there. Let me, again, memorize this picture because I'm going to put up some other diagrams. We've got parallel parking on the left, the entire left side, which is the east side, Nicola Pizza side. On the right side, we have only 3 parallel parking spaces before it converts to a turn lane up here. And so therefore it gives us 1 southbound through lane and 1 northbound through lane. The widths there are the through lanes are 10.5 feet, and the parallel parking is about 8.5 feet. The pedestrian paths are about 8 feet on one side, and on the Nicola side, only about 6 feet. So if we take a look at, close out of your screen there. This document was sent to you earlier, trying to figure out how to explain this area here. If you look at the simplest of solutions, right here, you get rid of all the parking and you've got a northbound through lane, you've got a southbound through lane, and you've got a right turn lane. Now that gets rid of 100% of the parking. Another option is doing this kind of thing, where you try to retain as much parking on the north side as possible. Again, that's where there's an opportunity to utilize some parking spaces for transformers, et cetera. It does cause the road to be curvy. We do have other curvy roads in Rehoboth. That's why I sent you this picture, for instance. This is brand new Streetscape number 2, where you've got to curve over to get in that area there. But this accommodates a travel lane turning into a through lane and a right turn lane. Option 3 is you retain all the parking on the east side. You have the single northbound through lane, and then you have a combined turn lane and through lane, which kind of violates Chief Banks' desire to have a turn lane such as this. And the other option, of course, is if you got rid of all the parking on the north side, retain, but you're only going to retain 3 spaces on the right, and this would be essentially the same configuration. Again, the goal there is to be able to widen the sidewalks, and to be able to do that, you need to convert one of those parking areas to sidewalk areas.
Mayor, how wide does that make the sidewalks in your illustration?
South of Baltimore, 1111. Depends which configuration you have, because if you have parallel, if you have this situation, you've got 8 foot, 11 foot, 11 foot. Here, you have to have 11, 11, 11. So that's 30, this scenario, you'd have 33 feet, and you would be able to widen the sidewalk, say, to approximately 10 or 11 foot wide on each side. Is that what you get? Now, in this situation where you've got 8, 1, 11, and 11, you'd be able to expand the sidewalk to maybe 12 or so on each side. These are just guesstimates. Again, here, you have to have 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, 11, but it still yields a wider sidewalk than you have there now. In fact, I gave you wrong dimensions. Some of the dimensions that Rossi gives are incorrect. I said 11 foot. It's only, on the Nicola side, it's only about 6 foot, 7, 8.
And that may be the difference between the right of way and the face of building.
Right, and that is the difference. So the sidewalks look wider in this area now than they actually are, because we're utilizing some of the private property. On the Nicola side, you'll recall previous meetings, we talked about our city right of way property line is only about 6 feet off the curb, whereas there's sidewalk on 5 foot of private property in front of Nicola. And that 6 foot plus 5 foot yields 11 foot. But we can only claim 6 foot. So we would still net a wider sidewalk than is there now. And I think for me, that's the goal.
Mayor, this is Howard Menaker.
Yes, Howard.
I agree with everything that's been said every time we talk about parking, which is that I hate to lose it anywhere. But if we look at the whole purpose of redoing this streetscape, it's to enhance that flow of pedestrian traffic from Rehoboth and from the boardwalk onto Baltimore and Wilmington. I'm not a huge fan of turn lanes, but I respect the chief, and I think he knows what he's talking about when he says you need a turn lane there. So I would think that whatever configuration we can choose that would give us wide sidewalks and a turn lane, perhaps a little bit of parking, as you have on that left illustration, although 1 or 2 spaces may not be enough. But I think if we widen the sidewalks in this block, we accomplish the aim of the streetscape, which is getting pedestrian traffic over at Baltimore Avenue, and we allow space, if we need it, for benches, lights, transformers, et cetera.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Again, we've got about 40 minutes left. I do want to go through Wilmington and Baltimore. So we don't necessarily, and so that would dictate one more meeting where we can hopefully finalize a lot of these. And I know this is a lot to absorb and it's a lot to analyze at this point. But anybody have feedback for Howard or any other comments?
One quick
Patty,
question.
go ahead.
How many spots are on the Nicola side of the street currently?
Eight spaces.
8. Okay. So if we lose, we would almost, with all the configurations, there's 8 and 3 on the opposite side. We're going to go down to 2 to 3 on that street total?
We don't know. With diagram number 1, this is just all approximated. It could be that we get 4 spaces. I doubt 5. It could be that we get only 2 spaces. Here. So this is just an illustration. That's all.
Yeah,
That's
diagram 1.
That's where if we go with this, we want Rossi to do some exact measurements and come up with a proposal.
Okay, because I mean, from the pictures that I was looking at, it looks like we're just going down from 11 down to 2 or 3. And that's just what I was questioning.
Again, we don't know. It's the concept that we have to explore to say, Rossi, we'd like you to take this out and see whether it works or not and what you come up with. These are just all done. These are all done by laypersons here. Yeah.
Yes, Mayor, Frank Cooper.
Yes, Frank.
Of these, I think number 4 is probably my favorite, if you want to call it a favorite, where we have retaining the most number of parking spaces while still widening the sidewalks, which is the overall goal. So I think, and I look at number 3, and I know that Chief Banks isn't going to like that. So that's kind of, and the city is going to defer to to him on that. So that's kind of out. The curviness and whatnot of number 1 is kind of contorted, difficult, and it only saves 2 spaces as opposed to 3.
Well, we don't know if it's 2 spaces, 3 or 4.
Right.
This is just illustrative. Yep. Go ahead, Frank.
I think generally that there's more space in diagram 4 than there is in diagram 1. And there seems to be less wasted space. And the through lanes are straight. So I think that's kind of the better of the configurations myself.
Again, the only disadvantage is these spaces on this side have the opportunity to be converted to bump outs to accommodate transformers, etc. Again, we don't even know if that's needed. That's why we've hired an engineering consultant to help us. But that was one thought in designing this option.
Well, yeah, that's a good thought, and I'm all for the undergrounding, as you know. But if are we saying? I don't know. I thought that you were saying that we were going to defer to Chief Banks' desire to have a turn lane there as an absolute. And if that's off the table, then I'm all for getting rid of that turn lane, because from my personal experience, and this is anecdotal, I don't live there, but I bike past there a lot. And people don't necessarily use that turn lane. They usually block both lanes when they're making a right turn. In other words, they don't get over far enough to really allow traffic to go past very often. So unless the turn lane's long enough and marked well enough that people actually get over onto it, then I think it's kind of superfluous. So I personally would you know, if the option of not having a turn lane is an option, a viable option, then that kind of changes everything to me. And then in that case, I think you're absolutely right that having that, because it's, let me go back here. It's option number 3 that retains the most space for parking and ostensibly for transformers, and widens our sidewalks and stuff. So that would be if we're willing to go get rid of the turn lane, which I would approve of, I would say 3. If we're not, then 4.
Well, I having lived in that area for 22 years, I see the value of the turn lanes, and what's going to happen is traffic's going to, well, while it's trying to turn right and wait for pedestrians crossing the street, it's going to back up traffic all the way to Maryland Avenue or something. So it'll be problematic. It's, you know, which problem do we want to deal with first?
Well, 4,
we can ask them to look,
well,
give us
4 does, option 4 does actually have parking spaces, which could be used for transformers if necessary. Is that correct? I mean, there is also, if we're talking about underground transformers, there's that transition space where the turn lane curves over and there's that sort of curvy thing in front of the parking space. And that could be a space that might be able to use for a transformer. So,
well, we've got an opportunity if we've got four ideas that we threw out here. If we want to select 2 of them, we can certainly have Rossi evaluate more than one option. Also, I would say, since we are not going to come to conclusions today, probably on any of these, when we come back next week, we have that opportunity to have had a little more time to think about these, but also we'll have the opportunity to have the chief in here in Public Works to give their opinions of some of these options as well. Any other comments offered on this section?
Yeah, Mayor, Edward Chnuski. This is the only block where I'd be in favor of losing parking spots. I think this is the most critical spot in this entire project, where it's important to widen the sidewalks as much as possible. And I think something to keep in mind is, you know, the sidewalk on the east side, as you mentioned, seems much wider than it actually is. And we have to assume at some point in the future, those properties could all or some of them could be built or renovated to the property line. And I think we need to take that into consideration and make the sidewalks as wide as possible. But personally, driving and making a right on that there at First and Rehoboth Avenue almost every single day, I think that turn lane is critical. If you have only one lane and someone's making a right turn on a busy summer day, when pedestrians are also crossing, traffic is just going to back up tremendously. So on that note, I'm kind of in favor of version 4 for those reasons. But that's my opinion.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Any other comment before we move to Baltimore Avenue?
Hi, Mayor. This is Jenny Burton. I just, I've been as we all been thinking about this a lot, and prior to getting our attachments and reading Michael Strange's recommendations, it's I feel like this is the perfect example of creating a charrette, which, you know, has to really be done in a location like Convention Hall or whatever for our group, because I was involved in a charrette program where building the elementary schools that we have at Cape District, and it's very, very effective. And what I feel like, everybody has opinions and concerns just as I do. I feel like this part is so critical, just like Edward said. It is the thoroughway or the thoroughfare to Baltimore Avenue, which is, as you know, we have businesses there. I feel like there's so much to say and so much to do when it comes to this section of our project. So I would love to, I support what Michael Strange says. I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse in a lot of ways. We should do a charrettes program, which allows people to go to different stations and write down opinions on each section of this project. And then you kind of come together and you put the stakeholders on each section can comment on it, and then it naturally forms a decision, or it naturally forms what the consensus is. This is a really, I mean, I wanted to say that because I feel like this part of our project is so critical to the streetscape, and we can't go back and do it over again. This is like kind of final for years and years and years. We have 7 food service businesses on this street right now as we speak, but that could change. We could have 9 or 10 in the future, to be able to have like tables outside and have it inviting, and to be able to have people walking from Rehoboth Avenue to Baltimore Avenue. I mean, there's just so much that goes into this. So I just wanted to comment about that.
Thank you, Jenny. I don't disagree, but we are on a time constraint. I believe that this group is the best form, that knows everything from beginning to end, and should have the first stab at all this. We do have scheduled a workshop meeting later in the year, where we're inviting everybody in for their opinions. But again, I think we need to have the first plans on the table at that time, so that they can come and have feedback. Otherwise, I think it'll be just a little more challenging. Any further comment on this section before we go to Baltimore?
Mayor, Howard Menaker here again.
Sir.
Given the considerations that we've discussed, I also would want to put my at least temporary support behind your version 4 to allow widening the sidewalks and keep the turn lane, even if we lose some parking here. And I think we look for opportunities to build parking other places. But I think I hear you that we need to make some decisions, at least until next week, or until a charrette, or until some other time. I would definitely support your number 4 there.
Thank you, Howard. Anybody else? If not, we're going to move on to Baltimore Avenue. Let me, before you go, we're going to do a walkthrough of Baltimore Avenue from 2nd Street down to the boardwalk. Before we go there, we just wanted to show you what one possibility is. This essentially is retaining all the existing parking configurations, but it does remove some parking when the width of the street is not wide enough. Parking is sacrificed, and when parking is sacrificed, we're able to widen the sidewalks there. So, down Rehoboth Avenue, or Baltimore Avenue here, you can see that we came up with 7 transition zones. And again, we'll do a street level walkthrough in a minute, but a couple notes. Remember how the road tapers and is wider at the boardwalk. We should have a philosophy, we believe there's a philosophy stated at the last meeting that sidewalks should widen as they approach in the boardwalk. So they get a little wider up here, probably consistent down here. We're saying the area closest to 2nd Street, 2 11-foot through lanes, but no parallel parking on either side. This should satisfy everybody mentioning concerns about the turning radius there for trucks going in or out. No parking first area. Then at the first transition, we changed to 2 11-foot through lanes, continue with the 11-foot through lane, but 8-foot parallel parking on the south side only. Why? That's because, again, the road is not wide enough to accommodate 2 11-foot through lanes plus 2 8-foot parallel parking sides and have or give us what we believe is sufficient sidewalk width. Now, this transition zone, we don't know where it is. That would be, if we agree to this scenario, that would be for analysis of Rossi to come up with and tell us where the transitions are for each of these. The third area would be transitioning to what we have now, and that's 8-foot parallel parking on each side and 2 through lanes of our minimum dimensions. And then right before we hit 1st Street, would be another transition. We would have 2 11-foot through lanes, and then on the north, parallel parking, but on the south, diagonal parking. That's because the road gets wider, but we still have the opportunity to widen the sidewalk. Then on the east side of North 1st Street, we would start off with the 2 travel lanes, 11-foot, but no parallel parking on either side. And then we transition to what I call expanding width through lanes. So all these through lanes so far are 11-foot, but starting at some point, those through lanes can be wider than 11-foot. They can go to maybe 12-foot and 13-foot or 14 feet. But no, and with diagonal parking on the north and south here, and then through lanes up here. Let me see if I can find one more diagram. I sent out this. This would be, say, perhaps a potential cross. Whoops. This would be a potential cross section nearest, closest to the boardwalk, where we've got perpendicular parking that needs 18 feet on each side. We've got 12-foot and 14-foot sidewalks opportunity and 20-foot travel lanes. Well, if we subtract a little from here, we can widen the sidewalk. So let's take a walk through Google Walk Street View and kind of review the same scenario and then get your feedback. Again, this is Baltimore starting at 2nd Street. So, based upon that drawing that we just went through with 7 transition areas, we're at an area where we're at the intersection of 2nd Street. And the first zone, if you will, would be to get rid of probably this car and most likely possibly this car, so that all this area is open. Essentially, you have 2 adequate drive lanes, through lanes, with open space on each side to accommodate vehicles turning in and turning out. Then we would go to some point farther east. Don't know where, but at this point, up until a certain point, stop there. We would start parallel parking on the right side, south side, and have no parallel parking on the aqua side or north side until Rossi determines that the road's wide enough to get an 11-foot through lane and another 11-foot through lane, 8-foot parallel parking on both sides that would accommodate, again, wider sidewalks on each side. So this would be our second and third transition zones. The third being we've got parallel parking on both sides. Then we're going to continue down. And probably one more. So now we're continuing in that long transition zone where we've got parallel parking on each side, 11-foot through lanes, wider sidewalks. And then once we get to right about here is the fourth transition zone where we transition to continued parallel parking on the north side and diagonal parking that needs 19 foot of width on the right side. And again, that gives us two 11-foot travel lanes and wider sidewalks on the north and south. Then finally, we cross the avenue, First Street. Now, once we get to First Street, we would get the next transition zone, according to what we drew, would get rid of a couple or however many parallel parking spaces on the side to accommodate turning. And then the next transition zone would be when you're far enough beyond the intersection to accommodate the minimum width of diagonal parking and still retaining minimum 11-foot travel lanes. And then farther up the road, where it actually changes, I believe, to head-in parking would be your final transition zone that allows for much wider through lanes and much wider sidewalks. So that's kind of a quick walkthrough. Something similar would probably happen for Wilmington, but I'd open the floor for discussion. Anybody?
Well, if
Frank
nobody-
Cooper.
No, I will always. As far as the widening of the lanes or retaining the wide lanes up towards the boardwalk, I would suggest that you not do that, except at the very end, there's going to be a constant turnaround there. And so you need space for cars to do their K-turns and turn around there. Other than that, I would opt for the wider sidewalks the entire width. In other words, if you're ostensibly going for an 11-foot wide lane, I would do it up to very close to the end and not go for a 12 or 13-foot wide lane. I don't think it serves any purpose. And we have an opportunity for some really wide sidewalks here. They could be boards or something else. There could be kiosks, street dining. There's a lot of real opportunities there to make this a very inviting area. And so, as in general, I think that keeping the wide lanes, I think they're ridiculous right now. I mean, it's just huge waste of space. But that said, at the end, I really think you need that in order for traffic to turn around and for trucks to turn around and whatnot. At the beginning, at 2nd Street, I'd still go for the minimum. I mean, if they're saying absolute minimum is 10 feet, I think on your chart, as opposed to 11, I would stick with it down there. That's a narrow street. It's narrow lanes are traffic calming, and we don't want people flying or speeding through there. I mean, it's a lot of people crossing the street on foot and whatnot. It's not conducive to the overall quality of life there to widen those lanes significantly. And it's just more lost parking for not much gain, really. I mean, I don't see where widening it from 9 to 11 feet is really going to gain you that much. I would take the extra foot. If the real minimum is 10, I would stick with 10 there and make the sidewalks wider. That's all.
Thank you, Frank. I don't agree, but appreciate your opinion. Yeah, I've walked these streets enough, and seeing two Cisco trucks or UPS trucks side by side and everything, they need that extra space. And I don't believe that anybody's going to be speeding down Baltimore Avenue there. But I'd like to get additional feedback there. If you recall, Dr. Trejos in his presentation last week, I believe it was, recommended maintaining the wide tapering traffic lanes down Wilmington to be able to accommodate 2 and 3 delivery trucks at the same time, side by side. So I think that definitely should be a consideration. Personally, I like the look of the road tapering wider toward Rehoboth Avenue. I think it's just very attractive. And yet I believe we can still do it with tapering and expanding the width of the sidewalks from First Street to the boardwalk. Any other comments?
Mayor?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Edward Chnesky. As you just mentioned, Dr. Trejos, it reminded me that I think we've got folks from the public on that we haven't heard from too much today, and I'd very much like to hear the opinions of those people.
We'll be getting to them very shortly. Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else?
Mayor, Howard Menaker here.
Yes, sir.
I think this discussion is the one that maybe disturbs me the most. I think this is where we are really limiting our imagination. When we think about Baltimore Avenue as we get to the boardwalk and Wilmington Avenue as we get to the boardwalk and what we want it to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, I think there are so many possibilities that we cannot even begin to think of. We know, for instance, that the lifeguard, the beach patrol building is going to be changed. How does that affect it? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing for attracting pedestrians off of the boardwalk? So this is where I think Mike Strange and Dr. Trejos and a number of us feel like we're hemming ourselves in by simply talking about parking and travel lanes. And so I don't know the answer, but I think that this is the area most of all in this whole project that we really need to widen ourselves out, maybe talk to landscape architects, maybe talk to architects, city planners, and get some truly innovative ideas that we can consider. And we may end up throwing them all out, but I would hate for us to begin to make decisions without knowing what all the possibilities are.
Thank you, Howard. Any other comments?
I have a comment. Pat Caluzzi. I agree with Howard Menaker. We need to make sure we're not limiting ourselves because this is, as Jenny Burton says too, you've all mentioned before, this is a plan that's going to be with us for a very long time. So I think we have to give some consideration to the opinions of some experts, perhaps like landscape architects or other architects' ideas. And I like Chernowski would really like to hear from the public who would like to.
Pat, you were garbled at the end. Can you repeat your last half of your message, please? A little louder.
Yes, I'm sorry. I like Commissioner Chernowski. I would like to hear from Dr. Trejos and Michael Strange and some of the people who have signed up to speak. Thank you.
Articulate that. Go ahead.
Sure. This is Kevin Williams. Just for everyone's benefit, I mean, Rossi is actually looking at, and they have a landscape architect on board, to looking at what to do at those two ends. You know, Mayor talked about the limited vehicle access down at the two ends. So they're looking at that. So whatever we get back from them, probably at the next iteration, we'll have some concept things there. But I think what we're trying to do here is just kind of get the philosophy on how we approach it. Maybe we're not dealing exactly with the end today, until we hear back from them, on what some of their options are for Baltimore and Wilmington. But more of just kind of the philosophy of how we approach coming down each of those streets and what we were trying to balance, those various widths.
Well, and again, that's why I kind of wrote some of the, read some of the objectives at the beginning, that Rossi, this is the direction Rossi is sending us, to pick out these things, because then they want to, take our recommendations and evaluate it for, the landscape areas, as I mentioned earlier, and for transition zones and, the limited vehicle access areas and, bioretention areas and trees and lighting and all that stuff. But again, this is the direction Rossi has sent us, as a first start. Correct, Kevin? I mean,
I think correct.
so. Are there any other comments on Baltimore? Maybe we'd like to do a walk down Wilmington, see if anybody has any comments, and then we'll call it a day. We'll get together next week and continue discussion and see if we can flesh out some of the questions and comments and directions we want to go. So we haven't done any particular plan for this. I think it would, you know, if you followed along Baltimore, it would have the same kind of philosophy to it, perhaps. So again, probably at I'm just making this up as I go. As we turn the corner there, we would not have any vehicles parked, parallel parked at the very end to accommodate vehicles turning on and off of Wilmington. And at some point, Rossi has to analyze the minimum travel lanes, and perhaps the same thing happens here. The parking spaces parallel is on one side only for a period of time until the road widens, to allow the sidewalks to be widened. And then as they go down, when the road gets wide enough to accommodate the minimum travel lanes, the parallel parking would resume on both sides. Then as we approach First Street, on the east side of First Street, the same thing. We need an analysis done to see if we need to get rid of some of the first diagonal parking spaces on the south side. And then just the same philosophy going all the way up the street. So let's entertain, see if there's any comments on this, and then we'll go to the public. Any comments for Wilmington Avenue from members? Frank Cooper.
Yeah, I'm kind of concurring with what both Howard and Ed and Pat said about looking at this, all of this block in particular, the boardwalk block, more in the overall development of pedestrian space and invitation from the boardwalk out as being the priority over the traffic lanes. And so I'm still not really a big fan of these tapered traffic lanes. I don't see what purpose they really serve, as opposed to maximizing the available space for whatever plans you might want to come up with for pedestrian activities or pedestrian friendly spaces. But I think we're cart before the horse trying to figure out how wide the lanes are and where the parking goes when we don't even have a concept for what we want this to be to look like in general. I think we need that overall picture. I think we're picking the sizes and dimensions of the windows before we've designed the house here. So.
Anybody else? Let's go to members of the public. They've been very patient, and you've got the floor. We'll go with Mike Strange.
Okay, I guess you can hear me now?
Yes, we can, Mike.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm glad I'm having some impact and it's positive. I would like to make just a couple observations, and I agree with what Mr. Cooper and Mr. Menaker and Ms. Moore pointed out, and Ms. Burton. Notwithstanding the fact that I completely disagree with how Rossi approached this, but forgetting that for a moment, to your point, Mr. Mayor, along First Avenue, I have 44 years of firsthand knowledge with regard to the placement of the poles on that street, and I'm sure they've been there for 50 or 60 years, maybe 30 years before that. Their positioning of the utilities are such that it inherently is limiting a lot of your options. And when you were showing in the presentation with Google Streetscape, you can see where it radically limits both the sidewalks, the turning radii for larger vehicles, et cetera. And even though Rossi recommended, or they said not feasibility to do underground is not likely due to space constraints. That's one of the things that actually, in this case, if you take a longer perspective, is probably the most crucial areas for gaining benefit for undergrounding. You'll also get benefit on Baltimore and Wilmington, but undergrounding not where you leave the transformers above ground, but where they're vaulted. And that's a common practice across many cities, including those that run the risk on the coastal plains where you have the risk of inundation. So I think that's one of the things that's going to dramatically impact what your choice of selection is, as was pointed out by several members of the committee, of what you want your house to look like. And I would just make forward two observations with regard to Wilmington first, is the fact that the current pavilion that's on the boardwalk has just been assumed to be there and it should stay there, is that maybe have to be reconfigured from the standpoint of as you bring the boardwalk further to the west, if you will, if that's what's decided. And your streetscape becomes much more park-like, and you may have mini pavilions. That's a physical possibility. The other thing is on Baltimore Avenue, with regard to the existing public facilities and the beach patrol, is how that building may be designed and integrated in with the beachscape. And maybe that train's already left the station and we can't have an impact on that. But that's part of, I think, one of the crucial elements of doing this entire integration and increasing the potential for people. The other is that with regard to some of the parking, and I couldn't find enough history in there, in many cases, whether the parking has been either at right angles to the sidewalk or angled, seems to have been a random choice, and I'm not sure why. And the potential exists, although there are some constraints, when you take your parking where you already have right angle parking and you angularize it just a bit, just as was done on Rehoboth Avenue, you automatically increase the potential to widen your sidewalks or your through lanes without having done anything. The other part is, just from historical perspective, the original formulation, although he wasn't totally responsible for it, as you were talking about it, Mayor Mills, is the streetscape on Rehoboth Beach Avenue was informed a great deal by who was in charge of the planning department at DelDOT, not the Transportation Solutions Group, but it was a planner. And I think that goes to the heart of the issue. You can't rely on DelDOT, whether it's for funding or for guidance, because they in fact focus strictly on transportation and not on the entire urban form. So I think you're off to a good start, and I will, based on this meeting, submit a whole series of comments more explicit than I did in the last one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Alex Papajohn, are you on? He's not on.
Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, we can now, Alex. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I don't have any specific comments. I agree with much of what Mr. Strange said, and so I think we'll probably have comments the next meeting, but not today. So thanks so much.
All right. Thank you very much. With that, we'll go to Rick Perry. Not on. How about Dr. Trejos? Are you available?
Yes, Mayor. Good morning, and good morning, members of the task force.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Very good. Thank you. Wanted to make some observations and some comments. First and foremost, I would like to note the observations that Michael Strange has made. They are absolutely on mark, and I absolutely support those observations that he has made. I'd like to make some comments with regard first to the turning lanes that we were talking about going southbound from Baltimore to Rehoboth Avenue. I concur with many of the members with regard to the options, and when you look at it, options 3 or 4 seem to be the most viable. But again, it also depends upon Chief Banks and the Public Safety Department as to whether or not the dedicated right turn lane is needed based upon the comments made. If it would be possible to have option 3, it would maximize the maximum number of parking spaces on that block. However, if a dedicated right turn lane would be needed, then option 4 would probably be the best one. Option 4 is the best in terms of an intuitive driver driving southbound to say, oh, I want to make a right turn, so I'm going to get into a right turn lane to make that right turn and allow for through traffic to go through. So again, I would probably look to either option 3 or 4. With regard, I'm sorry, one moment. That was the weather alert radio going off. Anyway, continuing the discussion here. With regard to the items that I had brought forth in my presentation last week, I wanted to again reiterate the importance, as Michael Strange had noted, that we continue to have a necessity to provide for appropriate truck and delivery along with public safety access to the east portions of both Wilmington and Baltimore Avenue. I believe if you look at the presentation that I had given, but again, you don't have it in front of you right now, you'll notice that the properties that are located, actually our property is located on the Wilmington Avenue there, which is Gus and Gus, goes 63 feet back from the boardwalk into the street. The opposing on the other side property, which is the Green Turtle, it also goes back 63 feet. But then again, because of the length of the trucks, you would need to add another at least 50 feet. So you're looking at preserving approximately 100 feet from the edge of the street going down westward in order to allow for the both public safety and utility trucks and the delivery. So again, any transition after that would be appropriate. But again, from a public safety perspective, it becomes important that we keep somewhat status quo, the ability to have adequate space on that east side to accommodate for all of that. Now, with regard to the west end of 2nd Street, but I don't believe we maybe have gone to that point. the very west end of Second Street, where we had that bottleneck that we discussed last week, I have looked at that very carefully. And if we were to eliminate the first parking space going east from the west end at Second and Wilmington Avenue, eliminating the first parallel parking street on the parking space on the left and the first parallel parking space on the right, i.e. on the north side and south side, which should provide adequate egress and entrance into Wilmington Avenue, and I believe that would be most appropriate if we would consider to do that. Now, I think everybody else has spoken adequately on all the other topics, and I really don't believe I have anything else that I need to further give to you, and I'll probably have additional comments that I will submit hopefully prior to the next meeting. And again, thank you, Mayor, and everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trejo. Thank you for everybody for public input. I'll open it up to the members if they have any further questions. And what we'll do is reevaluate our path forward and take into consideration your questions and comments today. But we do need to schedule another meeting for next Wednesday, 9 o'clock, to see if we can move this forward. With that, are there any other comments from the members? Well, I want to thank everybody for being here, and your time commitment is very important. Sorry to take you over a little bit, but we'll adjourn this meeting at 11:07 and see you next week. Thank you very much.